They walked through my door after 15 years and said they wanted their children back. My hands are shaking as I tell you this story. I'm 73 years old, and I never imagined I'd be fighting the hardest battle of my life at this age. My name is Eleanor, and 15 years ago, my daughter Cassandra and her husband Viktor left their two babies on my doorstep with nothing but a note that said they weren't ready to be parents. Little Sienna was only 3 years old, and baby Matthias was just 8 months old. I remember standing there in my nightgown at 5 in the morning, watching their car disappear down the street, wondering if I was living in a nightmare. But those babies were real, crying and confused, reaching their tiny hands toward me. What was I supposed to do? Turn them away? Call the authorities and let them disappear into a system that might separate them forever? No. I picked them up, brought them inside, and made a promise to God and to those innocent children that I would give them the life they deserved. Those first few years were the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've lived through losing my husband, surviving cancer, and burying my own parents. But raising two traumatized toddlers in my 60s while working part-time at the library, that was something else entirely. Sienna would wake up screaming every night for her mother, and I'd hold her until dawn, singing the same lullabies I'd sung to Cassandra when she was small. Matthias wouldn't eat for anyone but me, and I spent months getting him to trust that I wasn't going to leave him too. I sold my car to pay for daycare. I took extra shifts shelving books until my arthritis made my fingers swell so badly I could barely hold a coffee cup. My friends from church brought groceries when my social security check didn't stretch far enough. But we made it work. We became a family. I watched Sienna take her first steps in my living room. I was there when Matthias spoke his first word, which was Nana. I taught them to read, sitting on my old couch with picture books spread across our laps. I walked Sienna to her first day of kindergarten, holding her hand while she clutched her unicorn backpack, terrified and excited all at once. I stayed up until midnight helping Matthias build a volcano for his third-grade science fair. I dried Sienna's tears when she didn't make the middle school soccer team, then cheered louder than anyone when she made it the next year. I taught Matthias to ride a bike in the park, running alongside him even though my knees screamed in protest. These weren't just moments. They were my entire world. Cassandra and Viktor never called. Not on birthdays. Not on Christmas. Not once in 15 years. There were no cards, no letters, no messages asking how their children were doing or if they were even alive. It was like Sienna and Matthias had never existed to them. I told the kids age-appropriate truths as they grew older. When Sienna was 7 and asked why she didn't have a mommy and daddy like her friends, I told her that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but that I loved her enough for 10 parents. When Matthias was 10 and found an old photo of Cassandra in my album, I told him that his mother had been very young and scared, but that didn't mean he wasn't wonderful and wanted. I never badmouthed their parents, even though there were nights I cried myself to sleep with rage at what they'd done. I wanted my grandchildren to grow up without that poison in their hearts. Last month, Sienna turned 18. She'd just gotten her acceptance letter to State University with a partial scholarship for soccer. Matthias, now 15, had just won second place in the regional robotics competition. We were celebrating with chocolate cake in my small kitchen when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it and there they were. Cassandra looked older, polished, wearing expensive clothes and perfect makeup. Viktor stood behind her in a designer suit, holding a briefcase. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My daughter, who I hadn't seen since that horrible morning 15 years ago, was standing on my porch like she'd just returned from a weekend trip. "Hello, Mother," Cassandra said, as casual as if we'd spoken yesterday. "We'd like to see our children. After 15 years of silence, after I'd given everything I had, sacrificed my retirement, my health, my peace of mind. She called them our children. I felt Sienna and Matthias come up behind me. Sienna's hand gripped my shoulder. "Nana, who is that?" she whispered. And that's when my heart truly shattered. My beautiful, brilliant Sienna didn't even recognize her own mother. Matthias stood there confused, looking between me and these well-dressed strangers. Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. "Baby, it's me. It's your mom." But Sienna just moved closer to me, protective, scared. I should have slammed the door. I should have called the police right then. But I was in shock, and some part of me, the mother part that still loved Cassandra despite everything, let them inside. We sat in my living room, the room where I'd rocked her babies to sleep thousands of times. And Cassandra told us they wanted to reconnect with their family. Viktor explained that they'd spent these years building a stable life and were now ready to be parents. They had a big house in the suburbs, successful careers, and they wanted Sienna and Matthias to come live with them. If you've ever loved someone with your whole heart, please subscribe to this channel. I need your support to finish telling you what happened next, because what they did after this moment broke me in ways I never thought possible. My granddaughter looked at me with tears streaming down her face and said 6 words that destroyed me. The silence in my living room was deafening after Viktor finished his prepared speech about their stable life in their big house with 4 bedrooms and a pool. Cassandra kept staring at Sienna and Matthias like they were strangers she was meeting at a business conference, not the children she'd abandoned 15 years ago. I watched Matthias shrink into the corner of my old couch, the same couch where he'd spent countless hours doing homework while I made dinner. Sienna sat rigid beside me, her hands still clutching mine so tight I could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips. My granddaughter, my fierce girl who faced everything head-on, was terrified. And that's when I found my voice again. "You need to leave," I said quietly. Cassandra's perfectly made-up face crumpled. "Mom, please. We know we made mistakes, but we're different people now. We go to therapy. We're married, stable, financially secure. We can give them everything you can't. Everything I can't." Those words hit me like a physical blow. She was right about one thing. I couldn't give them a big house or expensive clothes or college funds that didn't require scholarships and loans. What I had given them was every single day of the last 15 years. Every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every nightmare I'd soothed, every parent-teacher conference I'd attended, every birthday cake I'd baked from scratch because store-bought was too expensive. I'd given them my life. Viktor opened his briefcase and pulled out papers. "Legal papers. We've consulted with attorneys," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "We're their biological parents. We have rights. This man who'd never once checked if his son was alive was talking to me about rights." Sienna suddenly stood up, her whole body trembling. "I don't know you," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know either of you. You're not my parents. Nana is my parent. She's the one who raised me." Cassandra reached for her, tears now openly streaming down her face. "Sweetheart, I know this is hard, but I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I gave birth to you. And then you left me." Sienna shot back, and I'd never heard such pain in her voice. "You left both of us. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Do you know how many times I wondered what was wrong with me that my own mother didn't want me?" I stood up, placing myself between Cassandra and Sienna. "That's enough. You will not come into my home after 15 years and traumatize these children. I don't care what your lawyers say. You abandoned them. You have no idea who they are, what they love, what scares them, what makes them laugh. You're strangers." Viktor's expression turned cold. "Mrs. Eleanor, we tried to do this nicely. We wanted to start with visitation, build a relationship, eventually have them come live with us. But if you're going to be difficult, we're prepared to go to court. We've documented everything. We're reformed. We're in a position to provide for them now. A judge will see that." My blood ran cold. Court, lawyers, a judge who would look at their big house and their money and their biological rights, and maybe decide that's what mattered more than 15 years of love. I'd heard stories. I knew how these things could go. My small pension and my tiny house and my 73-year-old body might not look like the best interest of the children on paper. That night, after I'd finally gotten them to leave with promises that we'd figure something out, I sat with Sienna and Matthias at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd done years of homework, played board games, and shared thousands of meals. Matthias was crying silently, the way he used to when he was little and trying to be brave. Sienna was angry, pacing back and forth, her hands balled into fists. "They can't take us, can they, Nana?" Matthias asked, his voice small and scared. "You won't let them take us." I wanted to lie. I wanted to promise them that nothing would change, that we'd be together forever, that their life as they knew it was safe. But I'd never lied to these children, and I wasn't going to start now. I'm going to fight with everything I have, I told them, pulling them both close. But I need you to understand something. The law is complicated. They are your biological parents, and if they take this to court, a judge might decide that you should at least spend time with them. Sienna pulled away from me, and the look on her face cut me deeper than any knife. I'm 18, she said. They can't make me do anything. I'm legally an adult. I choose you, Nana. I'll always choose you. But Matthias was only 15. Matthias, my sweet boy who still had nightmares sometimes, who struggled with anxiety because of the abandonment he'd suffered as a baby, who needed routine and stability and the safety of our small, predictable life. The thought of him being forced to leave, to live with strangers, to lose the only parent he'd ever known, it made me physically ill. I held him while he cried, and Sienna joined us, and we sat there in our tiny kitchen, holding onto each other like we were drowning. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to my library shift and went to see a lawyer. I'd found him through my church, a kind man named Mr. Peterson who specialized in family law. I sat in his office with my hands clasped in my lap, trying not to shake, and told him everything. He listened, took notes, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Eleanor, he finally said, I'm not going to lie to you. This is going to be difficult. In cases like this, biological parents often have the advantage, especially if they can prove they're rehabilitated and stable. What are my chances? I asked, even though I was terrified of the answer. He sighed. If we can prove abandonment, if we can show that reunification would be detrimental to the children's well-being, if Matthias clearly expresses his wishes and Sienna testifies on your behalf, maybe 50-50, but it's going to cost money for a proper defense, court fees, evaluations, possibly expert witnesses, money I didn't have. He must have seen the despair on my face because he leaned forward. I'll work with you on payment. And there's another option. If your daughter is serious about building a relationship, we could negotiate a custody arrangement that keeps the children primarily with you, while allowing supervised visitation. It might satisfy a court better than an all-or-nothing fight, but when I called Cassandra to suggest this, she refused. We want full custody, Mother. We're their parents. They belong with us, belong with them. Like my babies were property. Like 15 years meant nothing. Please, if you're a parent or grandparent watching this, hit that subscribe button. I'm going to need all the support I can get to tell you about the court battle that nearly destroyed us all. *. The judge asked my 15-year-old grandson one question, and his answer made the entire courtroom go silent. The weeks leading up to our first court date were the darkest of my entire life, and I've lived through things I never imagined I'd survive. I watched my grandchildren, my babies, walking around our house like ghosts. Sienna stopped eating properly. She'd just push food around her plate during dinner, staring at nothing. Her soccer coach called me worried because she'd broken down crying during practice. Matthias started having panic attacks again, something we'd worked through years ago with a therapist I could barely afford. He'd wake up gasping for air at 2 in the morning, and I'd hold him just like I did when he was a baby, whispering that everything would be okay even though I didn't know if it would be. I had to tell my supervisor at the library what was happening because I needed time off for court appearances and Loie. Our meetings. She was kind about it, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I was already 73, already struggling with arthritis and high blood pressure. The stress was literally making me sick. I lost 12 pounds in 3 weeks. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at night, staring at my ceiling, wondering how I was going to afford Mr. Peterson's fees even with his discount. My savings account, which I'd been carefully building for emergencies, was draining fast. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I owned. It broke my heart, but not as much as losing my grandchildren would. Cassandra and Viktor started what they called establishing a presence in the children's lives. The court ordered supervised visitation while the case was pending, which meant every Saturday, a social worker would bring Sienna and Matthias to a neutral location to spend 2 hours with their biological parents. Sienna refused to go after the first visit. She was 18, legally able to make that choice, and she made it clear she wanted nothing to do with them. But Matthias had no choice. I'll never forget watching him walk out of our house every Saturday morning, his shoulders hunched, his backpack clutched to his chest like armor. He'd come home quiet and withdrawn, and it would take until Tuesday for him to seem like himself again. Cassandra started a social media campaign. She posted old baby pictures of Sienna and Matthias, pictures I didn't even know she had, with captions about finding her way back to her babies and a mother's love never dies. She had friends, thousands of them apparently, commenting about forgiveness and second chances. She portrayed herself as a young woman who'd made a mistake, who'd struggled with postpartum depression and an unsupportive partner, who'd spent 15 years getting herself together so she could be the mother her children deserved. She never mentioned that she'd never called, never sent money, never checked if they were alive. Viktor posted pictures of their beautiful home, the bedrooms they decorated for when the kids come home, complete with expensive furniture and the latest electronics. They were building a narrative, and it was compelling. I was just an old woman with a small house and a part-time job. The court-ordered psychological evaluation was humiliating. A stranger asked me questions about my health, my finances, my parenting methods. She asked if I'd ever said negative things about Cassandra to the children. She asked if I had the energy to parent a teenager. She asked about my life expectancy. Actually used those words, wondering what would happen to Matthias when I died. I sat there, trying to maintain my dignity while this woman essentially asked me to justify why I deserved to keep raising the children I'd loved and sacrificed for. Sienna and Matthias had to go through evaluations too. I waited in the hallway while Matthias was in there for 2 hours, and when he came out, his eyes were red from crying. My church community rallied around us in ways that made me weep with gratitude. They started a fundraiser to help with legal costs. My friend Dorothy, who I'd known for 40 years, organized a letter-writing campaign. Teachers from Sienna and Matthias's schools wrote statements about how involved I'd been, about the children's stability and success under my care. Sienna's soccer coach wrote a passionate letter about what a dedicated guardian I'd been, never missing a game even when I had to take the bus because I'd sold my car years ago. Matthias's robotics teacher described him as thriving, well-adjusted, and clearly loved. We had community support, but I didn't know if that would be enough against biological rights and a big house in the suburbs. The preliminary hearing was devastating. Cassandra showed up looking perfect, professional, remorseful. She had a therapist testify that she'd done extensive work on herself, that she understood the trauma she'd caused, that she was committed to making amends and building a relationship with her children. Viktor presented financial documents showing they could provide everything Sienna and Matthias needed: college funds, healthcare, opportunities. Their lawyer painted a picture of rehabilitation and redemption. Then he started questioning me. He asked about my age, my health issues, my income. He asked if I could really handle a teenage boy. He questioned whether I was being selfish, holding onto children who could have so much more with their biological parents. Peterson did his best. He presented evidence of abandonment, statements from teachers and coaches, documentation of my involvement in every aspect of the children's lives. But I could see it in the judge's face. Ash was considering biology, considering resources, considering the fact that Cassandra and Viktor appeared genuinely remorseful and reformed. The judge ordered increased visitation. Matthias would now spend every Saturday and Sunday with his biological parents. For days a month with strangers. My boy came home from the first weekend pale and quiet. He barely spoke for 2 days. Then something happened that changed everything. During one of these weekend visits, Viktor tried to bond with Matthias by taking him to an expensive restaurant. Matthias, my sweet boy who struggles in new environments, who needs routine and familiarity, had a full panic attack at the table. Viktor didn't know what to do. He didn't know that Matthias needed a quiet space, a familiar voice, specific grounding techniques we developed over years. He called 911. Matthias ended up in the emergency room, and they called me, not Cassandra. I arrived to find my grandson on a hospital bed, hyperventilating, asking for me. The ER doctor asked me what his triggers were, what helped him calm down, what his medical history was. And I could answer everything because I was his parent in every way that mattered. Viktor and Cassandra stood in the corner of that hospital room, looking lost and uncomfortable. This was their son, and they didn't know him at all. They didn't know he was terrified of loud restaurants because of sensory issues. They didn't know he needed warnings before transitions. They didn't know that when he was overwhelmed, he needed someone to count backwards from 10 with him while he focused on breathing. I knew all of this because I'd lived it, learned it, been there for it. Cassandra watched me calm Matthias down, watched him clutch my hand and bury his face in my shoulder, and for the first time, I saw something in her face that looked like understanding. But the legal battle continued. Our trial date was set for 3 weeks away. Mr. Peterson was cautiously optimistic after the hospital incident, but he warned me that judges could be unpredictable. I spent those 3 weeks preparing Matthias as best I could. The judge would likely want to speak to him, to hear directly what he wanted. I told him to tell the truth, whatever that was. I told him I would love him no matter what happened. I told him that even if he had to live with Cassandra and Viktor, I would fight to see him as much as possible. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room, looking at 15 years of photos on my walls. Sienna's gap-toothed kindergarten smile. Matthias covered in flour from our first attempt at baking cookies together. Both of them at the beach, the trip I'd saved for 2 years to afford. Every school photo, every holiday, every milestone. This was our life. This was real. I know many of you have been through custody battles or legal nightmares. Please subscribe so you can see how this story ends. What happened in that courtroom changed everything, and I need you with me for the next part. When the social worker stood up in court and said what she'd discovered, my daughter's lawyer went completely silent the morning of the trial. I dressed in my best clothes, a navy dress I'd bought at a thrift store, and the pearl earrings my late husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. My hands shook so badly while putting them on that I dropped one, and it rolled under my dresser. I got down on my knees, my arthritis screaming in protest, to fish it out. Sienna found me there, on the floor of my bedroom, crying. She helped me up, fixed my earrings, and told me she loved me. She'd insisted on coming to court even though she didn't have to, even though it meant missing her first week of college classes. Matthias was pale and silent during breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate. I didn't force him to eat. I just held his hand. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television shows, and colder. Cassandra and Viktor sat with their lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in an expensive suit who'd probably never shopped at a thrift store in her life. They'd brought witnesses: Cassandra's therapist, Viktor's business partner who talked about his character, even Cassandra's mother, my ex-mother-in-law who I hadn't seen in 20 years and who'd never once called to check on her great-grandchildren. The first 2 hours were brutal. Their lawyer painted a picture of 2 reformed people who'd made a terrible mistake in their youth but had spent 15 years becoming worthy of parenthood. She talked about their 4-bedroom house, their stable marriage, the college funds they'd already established. She showed photos of the bedrooms they'd prepared, complete with everything teenagers could want. Then she started attacking me. She brought up my age, suggesting I wouldn't be around much longer to care for Matthias. She questioned my income, implying I couldn't provide adequately. She even brought up the fact that I'd sold my car and my mother's necklace, suggesting financial instability rather than sacrifice. She asked if it was fair to keep children from parents who could give them opportunities I never could. Every word was a knife. Mr. Peterson objected when he could, but some of the damage was done. I could see the judge taking notes, her face unreadable. Then it was our turn. Mr. Peterson called Sienna first. My beautiful granddaughter walked to the stand with her head high, and I'd never been more proud of her. She testified about her childhood, about how I'd been at every soccer game, every school event, every moment that mattered. She talked about the sacrifices I'd made, working extra shifts while studying for my GED at night so I could help with their homework. She described coming home from school to fresh-baked cookies and help with math problems, to someone who knew her friends' names and her teachers' names and everything about her life. When Cassandra's lawyer asked her if she'd give her mother a chance, Sienna looked directly at Cassandra and said, "She had her chance. She had thousands of chances over 15 years. She chose not to take any of them." The court-appointed social worker, Mrs. Chen, testified next. She'd been doing home visits with both families, observing the visitations, interviewing teachers and counselors. She was supposed to be neutral, but when she took the stand, something changed. She described visiting our small house, seeing how Matthias had a dedicated homework space at the kitchen table, how photos of the children covered every wall, how the refrigerator was full of their artwork and achievement certificates. Then she described visiting Cassandra and Viktor's house, beautiful, spacious, but sterile. The children's rooms looked like hotel rooms, she said, decorated by someone who didn't know the children at all. Wrong colors, wrong interests, everything generic. But then Mrs. Chen said something that made the entire courtroom go quiet. During her investigation, she'd done something thorough. She'd checked records, public records, employment records, social media histories, and she'd discovered something Cassandra and Viktor hadn't mentioned. For the first 8 years after they'd left, they'd been living less than 40 miles away. 40 miles. They hadn't moved across the country or been trapped in impossible circumstances. They'd been close enough to visit, close enough to call, close enough to send birthday cards. But they hadn't. Mrs. Chen had found Cassandra's social media from that time. Photos of her at parties, at restaurants, living a child-free life while her babies grew up without her. Viktor had started 3 different businesses during that time. They'd been building their lives, their careers, their futures. They'd simply chosen not to include their children in any of it. Cassandra's lawyer tried to object, tried to say this was prejudicial, but the judge allowed it. The damage was done. This wasn't a story of young parents who'd struggled and couldn't find their way back. This was a story of abandonment by choice, year after year after year. Mr. Peterson pressed further. He asked Mrs. Chen about her observations during the supervised visits. She testified that Matthias showed clear signs of distress, that Cassandra and Viktor didn't know how to comfort him or connect with him. She described the panic attack incident, noting that they'd called emergency services rather than the child's primary caregiver who would have known how to help. Then the judge said she wanted to speak to Matthias privately in her chambers. This was the moment I'd been dreading. My 15-year-old grandson, already anxious and traumatized, would have to face a judge and express his wishes. They took him back while we waited in terrible silence. Sienna held my hand so tight I lost circulation. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. When they came back out, Matthias's eyes were red, but his face was resolved. He sat down next to me and whispered, "I told her the truth, Nana. I told her everything." The judge called for a brief recess before her ruling. We stood outside in the hallway, and that's when Cassandra approached me. She looked broken, her perfect makeup smudged with tears. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I abandoned them, but I'm their mother. Doesn't that count for something?" I looked at this woman, my daughter, who I'd raised and loved and who'd disappointed me more than I ever thought possible. And I told her the truth. Being a mother isn't about biology, Cassandra. It's about showing up. It's about 3 a.m. fevers and homework help and sacrificing everything you have for someone else's happiness. You gave birth to them. I raised them. And there's a difference. Viktor pulled her away, whispering something in her ear. Their lawyer looked worried, checking her phone repeatedly. Mr. Peterson told me he felt good about our chances, but that nothing was certain. We went back into the courtroom. The judge returned, her expression serious. She asked everyone to sit down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. Sienna gripped my hand on one side, Matthias on the other. This was it. 15 years of love and sacrifice, coming down to one decision by a stranger in a black robe. The judge began to speak. She talked about the complexity of the case, about biological rights versus the best interest of the child, about the importance of stability and attachment. She noted Cassandra and Viktor's apparent rehabilitation but also the extensive period of abandonment. She talked about my age and resources, but also about the clear bond between me and the children. Every word felt like it took an eternity. And then she addressed what Matthias had told her in chambers. She said he'd been clear, articulate, and firm in his wishes. She said he described his life with me in detail, the routines that kept him stable, the love that kept him safe. She said he'd expressed terror at the thought of leaving the only parent he'd ever known. Then the judge looked at Cassandra and said words I'll never forget. "Miss Cassandra, you made a choice 15 years ago to leave your children. Mrs. Eleanor made a choice to raise them. Those choices have consequences. Please subscribe right now if you want to know how this judge ruled. The decision she made changed all of our lives forever, and I'm almost at the end of my story. I need you here for the final part." The judge's final words were 6 syllables that either destroyed my family or saved it. The judge continued speaking, and I felt like I was underwater, hearing sounds but not quite processing them. She talked about the evidence presented, about the social worker's report, about the children's expressed wishes. She noted that Sienna, as an adult, had made her choice clear and that choice was to remain with me. Then she turned her attention to Matthias, and my heart stopped beating. She said that while biological parents have rights, those rights are not absolute when abandonment has occurred. She said that 15 years of absence cannot be erased by current financial stability or reformed behavior. She said that Matthias's emotional well-being, his stability, his clearly expressed wishes, and his established bond with me were the paramount concerns. Therefore, she said, and the pause that followed was the longest moment of my entire life, I am granting sole legal and physical custody of Matthias to his grandmother, Eleanor, who has been his primary caregiver for the entirety of his conscious memory. The courtroom erupted. Cassandra let out a sound like a wounded animal. Viktor stood up, arguing, until the judge told him to sit down. Sienna was crying, clutching me. Matthias buried his face in my shoulder, his whole body shaking. I couldn't move. I couldn't process what had just happened. We'd won. My baby got to stay home. But the judge wasn't finished. She said that while she was granting me full custody, she was also ordering a reunification plan for Cassandra and Viktor. They would be allowed supervised visitation twice a month, with the possibility of increased contact if Matthias became comfortable with it. The visits would be voluntary if Matthias expressed a wish not to go. He wouldn't be forced. A therapist would be involved to help process the abandonment trauma and potentially build a healthier relationship. The judge made it clear this was about Matthias's needs, not his biological parents' wants. She also ordered Cassandra and Viktor to pay child support retroactively for the past 15 years. The amount she named made Viktor's face go white. As we left the courtroom, Cassandra tried to approach us. Security stopped her, but she called out to Matthias. "I love you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I know I failed you, but I love you." Matthias looked at her, this woman who was genetically his mother but who was essentially a stranger, and said something that broke my heart, even as I understood it. "I don't know you well enough to know if I love you back, but maybe someday I could try to know you, just slowly, and at Nana's house." It was more grace than I would have given her. But Matthias had a bigger heart than mine. The weeks following the trial were a strange mixture of relief and adjustment. Matthias started therapy to process everything that had happened. His therapist said he'd likely struggle with trust and abandonment issues for years, maybe forever. The panic attacks didn't disappear overnight, but slowly, with the security of knowing he wasn't going anywhere, he started to heal. Sienna started college, calling me every night to check in. She felt guilty about leaving for school during such a difficult time, but I told her to live her life, to be young, to be free of this burden we'd been carrying. Cassandra and Viktor's first supervised visit happened 3 weeks after the trial. Matthias was terrified, but his therapist came with us, and we met at a neutral location, a family counseling center. I stayed in the waiting room while they spent an hour together. When Matthias came out, he looked exhausted but okay. They asked about school. He told me on the drive home. They didn't really know what to say. It was awkward. The visits continued, twice a month, sometimes going okay, sometimes ending early because Matthias was overwhelmed. I never pushed him. I let him set the pace. One day, about 4 months after the trial, Cassandra asked if she could speak to me privately. We met at a coffee shop, the first time we'd been alone together in 16 years. She looked older, tired, humbler than I'd ever seen her. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said immediately. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught or sorry I lost in court. Sorry for what I did to those babies. Sorry for what I put you through. I was selfish and scared and I made the worst decision of my life." I didn't know what to say. Sorry felt inadequate for 15 years of abandonment, but it was something. She told me she'd been in intensive therapy since the trial, really digging into why she'd left, why she'd stayed away. She said she'd had severe postpartum depression that went untreated, that she'd felt overwhelmed and trapped, that Viktor had encouraged her to leave. She said she was ashamed, and the longer she stayed away, the harder it became to come back. "I told myself they were better off without me," she said. "I convinced myself you were their real mother and I was just the woman who gave birth to them. I built a whole life pretending they didn't exist because facing what I'd done was too painful." None of this excused her actions, but it helped me understand them slightly better. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she continued. "I know I destroyed any right to that, but I want you to know that I see now what you've done for them. I see the kind, smart, resilient people they've become because you raised them. I see Sienna's confidence and Matthias's gentle heart, and I know that's all you. You're their mother. You've always been their mother. I just gave birth to them." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. The child support payments started coming monthly. It was more money than I'd ever seen, enough to rebuild my depleted savings, to finally fix the leak in my roof, to buy Matthias the computer he needed for school without sacrificing groceries. I put most of it into college funds for both kids. Cassandra also paid back the legal fees, which Mr. Peterson hadn't expected. She wanted to contribute financially, even if she couldn't be there in the ways that mattered most. Slowly, very slowly, Matthias started to open up to his biological parents. It took almost a year, but eventually he invited them to one of his robotics competitions. They came and sat in the back, and afterward, he introduced them to his team members as my birth parents, who I'm getting to know, not mom and dad. Maybe never mom and dad, but not strangers anymore either. Sienna remained distant, unwilling to forgive, and I supported her in that. Everyone heals differently. Everyone has the right to set their own boundaries. I'm 74 now, and my health isn't what it was. My arthritis is worse, and I had a scare with my heart last month. Matthias found me passed out in the kitchen and called 911. That terrified both of us. This reminder that I won't be here forever. We've talked about it, honestly, the way we talk about everything. I've made arrangements. Sienna will become Matthias's guardian if something happens to me before he turns 18. Not Cassandra. That was Matthias's choice, and the court approved it. Sienna is only 19, but she's capable and fierce and loves her brother with everything she has. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Matthias will ever truly forgive his biological parents, or build a real relationship with them. I don't know if Sienna ever will. I don't know how many more years I have to see them grow, to watch them become whoever they're meant to be. But I know this, I kept my promise. I gave them the life they deserved. I was there for every moment I possibly could be. I fought for them when it would have been easier to give up. I loved them with everything I had, and that love will stay with them long after I'm gone. Last week was Matthias's 16th birthday. We celebrated at home. Just the three of us, like always, me, Matthias, and Sienna, who'd driven home from college for the weekend. We had chocolate cake, his favorite, homemade because store-bought still feels too expensive even though we can afford it now. He opened presents, a new robotics kit, some books, a sweater I'd wear upon. Then he handed me an envelope. Inside was a card he'd made himself, with a photo of all of us from when he was 5 years old. Inside, he'd written to Nana, "You didn't have to raise us, but you did. You didn't have to fight for us, but you did. You didn't have to love us like we were your own, but you did. Thank you for choosing us every single day for 15 years. You're not just my grandmother. You're my hero. I love you forever." I'm sitting here in my living room where I rocked both of them to sleep as babies, where we've shared thousands of meals and millions of moments. This journey has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most important. I didn't do it for recognition or praise. I did it because those babies needed someone, and I was there. I did it because love isn't about biology, it's about showing up, day after day, year after year, no matter how hard it gets. If you're raising a grandchild, or if you've stepped up for a child who wasn't yours by birth, but became yours by love, I see you. I know how hard it is. Keep going. You're doing something that matters more than anything else in this world. Thank you for being here with me through all 5 parts of my story. If this moved you, if you cried with me or felt hope from my journey, please subscribe to this channel. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, and who loves you when you need it most. God bless you all.